On Tuesday, in a quiet district of Shanghai called Shuhui, China opened a building that could quietly decide who wins the next technological century. No fireworks, no global press conference. Just 26 companies walking through the doors of something called the Shanghai Quantum Computing Future Industry Incubation Zone. It sounds bureaucratic. It sounds boring. It is neither. Because what just opened in Shanghai isn't a research lab experimenting with theories. It's an industrial engine, built with government money, designed to turn quantum computing from a laboratory curiosity into a weaponized economic advantage. And if you understand what China is actually building here, you'll realize this single announcement might be one of the clearest signals yet of the country's real long-term endgame. Before going any further, it helps to understand why quantum computers are so fundamentally different from anything sitting on your desk right now. A regular computer processes information using bits, tiny one. A quantum computer uses qubits instead. And thanks to a strange property called superposition, a qubit can effectively represent both a 0 and a 1 at the same time. Link enough qubits together through something called entanglement, and the computer's processing power doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows exponentially. That's why industry insiders keep pointing to roughly 1,000 stable, error-corrected qubits as a so-called magic number, the point at which quantum machines could realistically begin tackling real logistics, materials, science, and optimization problems that classical supercomputers simply cannot handle efficiently. China's approach to actually building that hardware follows what researchers call a dual-engine strategy, pursuing two very different physical methods simultaneously rather than betting everything on one. The first engine is superconducting qubits, tiny circuits cooled to temperatures colder than deep space. The same general approach companies like IBM and Google have pursued in the United States. The second engine is photonic quantum computing, which uses particles of light instead of cooled circuits, potentially offering a path towards smaller, more portable systems down the road. Origin Quantum and SpinQ have focused heavily on the superconducting side, while companies like TuringQ, based in Shanghai, are building out China's photonic quantum chip capabilities. Running both approaches in parallel is expensive and resource-intensive, but it also means China isn't putting all of its strategic eggs into a single technological basket, hedging against the very real possibility that one approach hits a wall the other doesn't. Let's start with what actually happened, because the details matter more than they first appear. The Shanghai Quantum Computing Future Industry Incubation Zone officially opened with 26 founding quantum companies already inside it. This isn't a symbolic ribbon cutting. The zone comes backed with up to 100 million yuan, roughly $14.7 million, earmarked specifically for foundational research, technology innovation, and platform development. On top of that, companies building their very first commercial quantum products can access an additional 20 million yuan in direct support. There are also computing resource subsidies built in, specifically designed to lower the cost of validating and testing new quantum hardware and software. This isn't charity. This is China placing a very calculated, very large bet, and it's doing it in a city already packed with artificial intelligence labs, positioning quantum computing and AI to grow directly into each other. Here's the part most casual observers miss. Shanghai isn't acting alone, and it isn't even acting first. It's the newest entrant in an intense, ongoing competition between Chinese cities, each one racing to become the country's dominant quantum hub. Hefei, the provincial capital of Anhui province, already reported more than 90 quantum-related companies operating within its borders, accounting for roughly a third of China's entire quantum industry at the time. Beijing introduced its own policy back in 2023, specifically supporting future-oriented industries, quantum computing included, and is now home to companies like Qboson, which is already piloting quantum applications in cancer research and drug discovery. Shenzhen has built its own cluster as well. What we're watching isn't one city trying something new. It's multiple Chinese cities competing internally, almost like rival franchises, all while contributing to one unified national strategy dictated from Beijing. And that national strategy has a name, a timeline, and a surprising amount of specificity. China's 15th five-year plan, covering 2026 through 2030, has officially designated quantum technology as the country's very first priority among 7 so-called future industries. Read that carefully. Not third, not fifth. First, ahead of biotechnology, ahead of next-generation telecommunications, ahead of nearly everything else competing for state resources. That kind of ranking isn't accidental in a system as centrally planned as China's. It's a direct signal to provincial governments, state banks, and domestic industry about exactly where money, talent, and political priorities should flow for the next 5 years. When Beijing labels something the number one future industry, local governments listen, and local governments move fast, which is exactly what we're now watching play out in real time across Shanghai, Hefei, Beijing, and Shenzhen simultaneously. This is where the story stops being about a funding announcement and starts becoming genuinely strategic. Because unlike the fragmented, company-driven approach you see in the United States, where Google, IBM, Rigetti, and IonQ each operate inside their own proprietary ecosystem competing against one another, China has built something analysts increasingly describe as a national team model. At the center sits the Hefei National Laboratory for Quantum Information Sciences, a multi-billion-dollar research hub coordinating efforts across the entire country rather than leaving each company to fend for itself. Origin Quantum, founded by professors Guo Guoping and Guo Guangshan, claims to be the only quantum computing company in the entire world building its complete stack in-house. Chips, dilution refrigerators, control electronics, operating systems, programming frameworks, and cloud platforms, all built internally, all without depending on a single foreign supplier. Its Wukong system has already scaled to 180 qubits, running commercially on a public cloud that customers can access right now. In February of 2026, Origin Quantum went even further, open sourcing something called Origin Pilot version 4, described as the world's first fully downloadable quantum operating system, and offering it completely free to the public. Why would a country hand out something this valuable for free? Because control over the operating layer of an entire technology stack is worth more than any single sale. If researchers, universities, and companies around the world start building their quantum applications on top of a Chinese-built operating system, China doesn't just sell hardware anymore. It sets the standard. Everyone else has to build around. That's not a business strategy. That's the exact playbook China has already used successfully with telecommunications, infrastructure, and it appears to be doing it again here, this time with quantum computing itself. Now let's talk about something even more consequential, because computing power alone isn't China's real trump card. Communication is. China has built, by a significant margin, the largest quantum communication network on the entire planet. The Beijing-Shanghai Quantum Communication Backbone, a 2,000-kilometer fiber optic line connecting Beijing, Jinan, Hefei, and Shanghai through 32 relay nodes, has been operational since 2017. Since then, that backbone has expanded into a nationwide network stretching more than 12,000 kilometers, spanning 145 backbone nodes across 17 provinces and 80 different cities. Layered on top of that ground network sits something even more remarkable, a functioning quantum satellite system. The MICUS satellite, launched back in 2016, remained operational for nearly a full decade before its orbital decay earlier this year, using entangled photons to distribute unbreakable encryption keys directly from orbit down to ground stations. China didn't just build a quantum computer, it built an entire quantum internet, years ahead of anyone else on Earth. Before we go further, if the scale of what China is actually building here surprises you as much as it surprised me researching it, do me a favor and hit the like button, and subscribe to the channel, because these are exactly the kinds of quiet, world-shifting developments we break down here every single week. Think about what it actually took to build that satellite system in the first place, because the numbers are genuinely staggering. MICUS weighed roughly 635 kilograms, orbited at around 500 kilometers above Earth, and carried an entangled photon source generating nearly 6 million entangled particle pairs every single second. It was designed for a 2-year mission. It ended up operating for almost a full decade before finally re-entering the atmosphere earlier this year. During that time, it proved something no other country had proven at that scale, that quantum-secured communication could realistically work not just across a city or country, but potentially across the entire globe, using satellites as relay points in the sky. China isn't stopping. They're either. Reports already point towards successor satellites and expanded ground station networks designed to eventually stitch together a genuinely global quantum-secure communication grid, one where China controls both the infrastructure and the standards everyone else has to work around. Here's why that communication network matters so much more than it sounds. This isn't just about sending secure emails faster. It's about a technology called quantum key distribution, or QKD, which uses the physical behavior of entangled particles to detect eavesdropping the instant it happens. Any attempt to intercept a quantum encrypted signal physically disturbs the particles carrying it, immediately alerting both sides that someone tried to listen in. In January of 2026 alone, Chinese researchers published 2 separate breakthroughs in the world's top scientific journals. One demonstrated a scalable quantum repeater using trapped ion memory over 10 kilometers of fiber. The other achieved something called device-independent QKD across 100 kilometers of fiber, roughly a 3,000-fold improvement over previous distance records. These aren't small incremental improvements. They're the exact building blocks needed to eventually stretch unhackable communication across entire continents. There's another layer to this that rarely gets enough attention: the deliberate collision between quantum computing and artificial intelligence happening right inside that same Suhui district in Shanghai. The neighborhood chosen for this new quantum hub isn't random. It already hosts major AI research labs, including StepFun AI and the Shanghai Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, placing some of China's most advanced quantum and AI researchers within walking distance of each other. Officials have openly stated they expect deep integration between these two technologies to accelerate development on both sides simultaneously. Quantum systems could eventually help train and optimize massive AI models far faster than classical hardware allows, while AI could help design better quantum algorithms and error correction methods in return. If that convergence plays out the way Chinese planners are hoping, it wouldn't just be a quantum breakthrough or an AI breakthrough happening in isolation. It would be two of the most transformative technologies of this century compounding each other's progress inside the same few city blocks. And this is precisely where the quantum story collides head-on with a much older, much more familiar fear, the death of modern encryption itself. Nearly everything protecting the modern internet, banking systems, government communications, and military networks relies on mathematical problems that classical computers simply cannot solve quickly. Factoring an extremely large number, the kind used in standard RSA encryption, would take a classical supercomputer trillions of years to brute force, but a sufficiently powerful quantum computer running something called Shor's algorithm could theoretically complete that same task in a matter of minutes. Nobody has built a fully fault-tolerant quantum computer capable of doing this at scale just yet. But every serious research lab in China, the United States, and Europe alike agrees we may only be a small number of years away from that threshold being crossed. This has already triggered something security researchers call harvest now, decrypt later, a strategy where state actors quietly intercept and store today's encrypted data, betting they'll eventually possess the quantum computing power needed to unlock it, retroactively. China's own answer to this looming threat is exactly the quantum communication network we just described, a system designed to make interception physically detectable rather than just mathematically difficult. In other words, while much of the world is still racing to patch its old encryption before quantum computers arrive, China has already spent over a decade quietly building an alternative system that sidesteps the entire problem using the laws of physics instead of math. So is this really just about science? Well, almost certainly not, and the numbers behind the funding make that obvious. China has poured roughly 3.2 billion yuan into quantum technology investment in just the first 3 months of 2026 alone, already exceeding its entire total investment for all of 2025 combined. Companies like SpinQ reported 80% year-over-year ORD growth in the same quarter, while Cuboson opened China's first large-scale photonic quantum computer factory in Shenzhen, delivering systems to major clients, including national supercomputing centers. Origin Quantum has initiated IPO counseling on Shanghai's STAR market at an implied valuation of nearly $1 billion. CIQ Tech, a separate quantum instruments company, cleared its own IPO approval at an implied valuation approaching $1.6 billion. This isn't experimental spending anymore. This is a maturing industrial sector with real revenue, real exports, and real customers, moving at a pace that caught even seasoned industry analysts off guard. There's also a fascinating twist buried in all of this, something almost nobody expected a few years ago. The United States placed several major Chinese quantum companies, including Quantum C Tech and multiple research institutes, onto its export control entity list, specifically hoping to slow China's progress by cutting off access to critical Western components. According to a 2025 assessment from the Royal United Services Institute, the actual effect has been the exact opposite of what was intended. Rather than stalling China's quantum ambitions, those export restrictions triggered a crash program produces its own dilution refrigerators, lasers, and single photon detectors, often at a fraction of the price charged by Western suppliers. Origin Quantum now even exports its own refrigeration hardware to countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. The attempt to contain China's quantum rise appears to have accidentally accelerated the very self-sufficiency it was designed to prevent. There's also a diplomatic dimension to all of this that's easy to overlook if you're only focused on the hardware itself. China isn't just building quantum technology for domestic use, it's actively exporting pieces of that ecosystem to countries participating in its Belt and Road Initiative, from dilution refrigerators to entire training programs and joint research centers. A Shanghai venture capital firm recently signed a partnership with Origin Quantum to build a joint quantum computing center in Malaga, Spain, extending China's quantum influence directly into Europe, rather than keeping it contained within its own borders. When a country exports not just finished products, but the underlying infrastructure and standards other nations build around, it creates long-term dependencies that are far harder to unwind than a simple trade relationship. That's a lesson China already learned from telecommunications, and quantum technology increasingly looks like the next chapter of that exact same playbook. So what does China actually plan to do with all of this once it fully matures? The applications being discussed aren't abstract or purely academic. Financial institutions in Shanghai and Shenzhen are already exploring quantum-powered Monte Carlo simulations, complex models used to predict market behavior by factoring in interest rates, geopolitical shifts, and consumer sentiment simultaneously. The promised advantage is real-time risk detection, potentially allowing institutions to spot market crashes or sudden black swan events minutes before classical computing systems could ever catch the same pattern. Biomedical researchers are exploring quantum simulations for drug discovery and cancer treatment, tasks that would take classical supercomputers years to model accurately. And military planners on every side of this race understand exactly what unbreakable, quantum-secured communication actually means for command-D systems, submarine coordination, and intelligence operations that must remain absolutely secure for decades. This is really the heart of the endgame question everyone should be asking. Quantum computing isn't just another item on a long list of emerging technologies competing for attention and funding. It's a foundational shift that touches encryption, finance, medicine, and national security all at the exact same time. Whoever builds the dominant quantum computing platform doesn't just gain a faster calculator. They gain the ability to potentially break the encryption protecting everyone else's secrets, while simultaneously protecting their own secrets using a communication method nobody else can intercept. That asymmetry, having the ability to read everyone else's mail while your own remains permanently sealed, is the single most valuable strategic advantage in the modern world, arguably more valuable than any conventional military weapon currently in existence. China clearly understands this, which is exactly why quantum technology sits at the very top of its next 5-year national plan, backed by billions of yuan in fresh investment and coordinated across cities that would otherwise be competing against each other for completely unrelated reasons. The Shanghai hub that opened this week is just the latest visible piece of a strategy that's been building quietly for nearly a decade, stretching all the way back to that first quantum satellite launch in 2016. Every relay node added to the fiber backbone, every new qubit added to Origin Quantum's roadmap, every WAN poured into a fresh incubation zone is another brick in a foundation designed to make China not just a participant in the quantum era, but its architect. There's one more thing worth sitting with before we wrap up, something that separates this race from almost every other technology competition in recent memory. Most breakthroughs, from smartphones to social media to even artificial intelligence itself, eventually became visible to ordinary people fairly quickly, showing up in products you could hold, apps you could open, tools you could immediately feel the impact of. Quantum computing doesn't work that way. Its biggest consequences, breaking old encryption, securing new communication channels, reshaping financial modeling and military coordination, will largely happen behind closed doors, inside government agencies, banks, and defense networks most people will never directly see. That invisibility is exactly what makes announcements like this Shanghai hub so easy to overlook, and exactly why paying attention to them now, while the foundation is still being poured, matters more than waiting for a headline-grabbing breakthrough that may never arrive in a form the public actually notices. Meanwhile, the response from the United States and its allies remains far more fragmented by comparison. Individual companies pursue individual roadmaps, chasing their own qubit counts, their own error correction breakthroughs, their own commercial customers, often with far less centralized coordination than what's happening across Chinese provinces right now. That approach has genuine strengths, particularly around innovation and competitive pressure, driving faster breakthroughs in isolated pockets. But it also means there's no single unified communication backbone comparable to what China has already built and deployed at national scale. There's no equivalent free open source quantum operating system being distributed globally to shape how the rest of the world builds its own quantum applications. And there's no coordinated 5-year industrial plan placing quantum technology as the undisputed top national priority ahead of every competing sector. So is Shanghai's new quantum hub really China's endgame, or simply one more chapter in a much longer, much larger strategy that's been unfolding since 2016? The honest answer is probably both. This isn't a single decisive move designed to win the race overnight. It's another deliberate, well-funded step in a patient, multi-decade strategy to control the foundational layer beneath the next era of computing, communication, and global security altogether. And based on everything happening in Shuhui District this week, and across Hefei, Beijing, and Shenzhen simultaneously, that strategy shows absolutely no signs of slowing down anytime soon. If this breakdown helped you understand just how far along China's quantum ambitions actually are, make sure to subscribe so you catch the next deep dive the moment it drops. And leave a like if you think more people need to see exactly what's quietly being built in Shanghai right now. Because while most of the world is still debating whether quantum computing is even real, yet China has already built the factories, the funding, the satellites, and the operating system to make sure it controls whatever comes next. And that, more than any single ribbon cutting in Zhuhai district, is the real endgame worth watching closely.